This episode of the All Automotive Podcast is brought to you by our friends at G Force Automotive. G Force Automotive is a certified service center through Auto Value. Want to make an appointment? Go to their website at www.gforceautomotive.net. Click on the banner that says Make an Appointment and make your appointment today. And now, the next episode of the All Automotive Podcast. All right, welcome back to another episode of the All Automotive Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Clausen, and today we're talking about the check engine light. Yeah, there was a customer in the shop. We had done some work for him, and I was the one backing the car around to pull it up front so I could deliver it to him. And when I started it up and backed it out of the shop, I noticed that the check engine light was on. And, there's a couple of different reasons why I wanted to bring it to his attention. Number one, so that when he left there, he knew that I knew that it was on, so that he couldn't say that we caused it by doing whatever we did. And I believe it was just an oil change, and we were just backing it out. And I came in and I told him, I said, wasn't sure if you noticed, but the check engine light's on. That's a service that we provide for our customers. We can evaluate that for you, and we can go from there. And he was like, "Oh man, that's nothing. That's been on for a long time. That's nothing. I'm not worried about that." And I kind of was shocked at that. I was like, "Okay, it's not nothing. And if it's left unaddressed, it could cost you hundreds of dollars, or it could be a catalytic converter that's starting to fail, and one of the things that happens to those when they fail, they plug up and your car doesn't go. Can't accelerate because the exhaust can't get out because the catalytic converter has physically melted itself together and won't let the exhaust out." So I was trying to bring it to his attention so that he knew that I noticed it, number one, and number two, that we could certainly address it for him. And he immediately dismissed it. And I thought, man, I really should talk about this on my podcast, because it's not nothing. There's something there. The computer is knocking on your window and it's like, hello. That's the engine computer's way of trying to get your attention on there's something wrong. Hey, it's the kid in class that's raising its hand to try to talk to the teacher. It's there for a purpose, and it's trying to let you know that there's something wrong. So in the next half hour, what I want to do is kind of go over what's going on and why we as a shop or as a repair facility would want to get to the bottom of this for you. Number one, because we care about you. Number two, we don't want you to spend any extra money on the fuel. And then we may want to address this issue prior to becoming a bigger issue. So we also wanted to tell him that it's not nothing. And it was kind of a difficult question for me to ask, because number one, I was kind of shocked that he just dismissed it. And it was like, oh, it's nothing. Somebody told me it was the gas cap that's left loose, or, it's nothing. Okay. So it's not nothing. The light comes on for a reason. And like I was saying, it's the kid in the class that's raising its hand to say, hey, there's a problem here. Hello. You need to have somebody take a look at this. So the light comes on, and I tried to let him know that you might want to try and address this before it becomes a bigger issue, before something major goes out, and then, you're in way deeper than you wanted to be, when we could have just fixed an oxygen sensor or what have you, and then your catalytic converter could have not failed because the engine was running too rich and too much gas, and the catalytic converter don't go well, and that never ends well. And something always, I went to a class one time on the catalytic converters, and the instructor of the class was just like, hey, something killed the kitty. There's always something that will affect something else if you don't address it. So the point I was trying to get across to the guy was just like, look, before it becomes a bigger issue and it's maybe tougher for you to be able to afford it, or to prevent a costly repair, let's take the steps necessary to evaluate it for you. And then you can make an educated decision on whether or not you want to move forward with that. Okay, so the check engine light comes on for a number of different reasons. And there was a car that came in the other day, and I am by trade a drivability technician, which means the check engine lights and the stalling and the different things like that came into my bay back when I was turning a wrench on the cars before I removed myself from the shop. So nowadays I'm actually helping my technicians go through the process and through the diagnosis process when we have cars like that come in. So I was going through the service information and I was looking up a code because I didn't recognize this code. And there's a lot of them that are recognizable. You know, the misfire codes are all recognizable because, you know, it's a worldwide standard, or an SAE standard that Society of Automotive Engineers, if you don't know what that means, they come up with these codes, and all manufacturers have to follow them. So if an engine is misfiring on cylinder number 1, the code is P for powertrain 0, which means it's a national worldwide code. It's not specific to that manufacturer, so it's 0. And then 301 is misfire cylinder number 1. 302 is cylinder 2, 303 is cylinder 4, 3, whatever, and so on. So I had never really seen this code, so I clicked on the service information that we have, and I said diagnostic trouble codes, and then I typed in the code. It didn't recognize it, so I went to the list. The list is really long, you know, so I mean, just imagine scrolling on your computer down, and it was like, so P0001 and then so on, all the way up to 2000 something is all these codes. And it's just like, I had forgotten a little bit that there are so many different reasons and so many different codes that can cause the check engine light that we really shouldn't take that lightly. It could be a lot of different things. You know, and I say that to the customers all the time. It's like, well, it comes on for over 150 different reasons. So let's evaluate it and then go from there. So it was a code that this particular model, it's a Chrysler product, and it was set in a code for the engine computer saw a difference in the oil pressure. So this is something that a lot of the manufacturers monitor now because they're turning off cylinders for fuel savings and so forth. They have displacement on demand or what have you. I grew up in the GM world, so we called it displacement on demand or active fuel management. So what this system does is it turns the cylinders off so that it saves fuel. So it has to monitor the oil pressure so that it can turn these cylinders off mechanically with oil pressure. So it has to monitor that. So anyway, this code was a code that I didn't recognize, and then I found it finally, and it saw that the oil pressure was not great enough. It wasn't enough. So it says, hey, there's an issue. Turn check engine light on. Okay, so it's not nothing. If you think about it, if it's actually telling you that there's not enough oil pressure, and if there's not enough oil pressure, it's kind of like your heart in your chest. If you can't pump the blood around your body, then there's a problem, and it needs to be addressed. You know, we don't have a check engine light on. You know, we don't have check engine lights that come on. That would be nice because, you know, my check engine light would have come on months ago for, you know, the problems I'm having with my knee or whatever. You know what I mean? It would be nice to have that, but you know, we're humans and we don't have that kind of ability. But in a car, it's important to address it. It really is. And then, you know, oh, well, Matt, we don't want to take up your time and do that stuff. No, it's something that if it's going to present an issue further on down the road and cost you more money, don't you think it would be wise to have us take a look at it before it becomes a bigger issue? Things get built up so much, and then things will get away from you. And we don't want those things to get away from you. And we want to see you. We talk to customers in different realities that have the ability to keep their car for a longer time because, it's harder to get a new vehicle. It's harder to get a used vehicle right now. And in the past year and a half or 2 years, it's been really difficult. So we have to hang on to these vehicles that we have and make an educated decision on if it's something that we want to fix based on our evaluation. Okay, so the check engine light comes on and you're talking to me and you're going, Matt, okay, now what do I do? Well, if you're a customer of ours, we schedule you an appointment and we evaluate it. And if it's something that you don't want to fix, you pay us for the evaluation and we go on about life. And if it's something that we can fix and repair, then we move forward with that. Piece of cake. Well, I don't deal with a shop. I can do stuff by myself, and I'm happy to talk to you and do stuff like that. But it is getting tougher and tougher for you to be a do-it-yourselfer when it comes to the technology that's out there and the sophistication of the vehicle. And I hear this a lot of times that, my friend told me to take it to AutoZone. They'll scan it for free. Okay, so this presents a problem too, people. Yeah, these parts stores and stuff will come out to your car with a code reader, which basically just connects to the vehicle based on what platform your vehicle communicates to the scan tool on, and it will pull out that code and it gives you the description. Okay, well, now what? So the code you get, let's just say, I'm just going to use this one because this one is really a good one to use in this example. Kid looks at it and he goes, okay, so it says PO 171, System Lean Bank 1. Okay. So, all right, well, I don't really know what that is. So let's go inside to our national thing and let's just poke that code in and it'll tell us what you should change. Okay, and this is not what we do, people. We take a very sophisticated scan tool, and if it's lean, then there's steps to take. There's a flow chart to follow. There's things to do. It's not just poking it into a national database and go, okay, all the parts stores across the country are replacing this part for a lean condition. So as a technician, there's several different tests that you probably should do. Okay, so there's things that you should do and consider before we just throw a part at it. So think about where you're at, people. You're at a parts store and they sell parts. So they want to go in, poke it into the computer, and they're like, oh, it's the oxygen sensor for that bank, for bank 1. Okay, well, which one's bank 1? It's a V6 engine. It sits in there sideways. Which side is bank 1, the firewall side or the front radiator side? Well, I don't know. Okay, so this is where our expertise and our ability to evaluate something like this comes in handy. Okay? And I'm not knocking these guys at the parts store. They've got a job to do and they're trying to sell you a part. But do they really know that it's the oxygen sensor because all these other places said it was an oxygen sensor? But what's the second most popular? What's the third most popular? What's the fourth most popular? What's the fifth most popular? Oh, now we've got intake gaskets, vacuum leak. Oh, there was a hose disconnected at the throttle body because I just had an oil change at the oil change place and they had my air cleaner all off and the guy didn't put the hose back on. It happens. It happens to the best of us. Okay. But it doesn't need an O2 sensor, right? Maybe it does. We don't know until we figure it out. Okay. So, the check engine light comes on and so it's like, what's next? Okay. So most of the vehicles will tell you if it's a gas cap issue or something like that. There's a system on the vehicle which recognizes pressure loss in the fuel tank. And it also keeps the tank on what we call an even keel because they're plastic and fuel expands and contracts. So if you listen to my E85 podcast on E85, I kind of explained that a little bit where we're talking about the difference between the E85 alcohol and and the regular gasoline. So I don't know if you've ever put a gasoline can after you filled it up, you're cutting your grass, and you run out of fuel in the lawnmower. So you go into the barn, get your gas can or garage or whatever, and you fill it up, but you don't use all of it. So you push you close everything up and you leave it there in the yard because, oh man, I only got like half the yard to do. I'll just leave the can right here in the sun, 80 degrees. That's going to expand. That fuel in there is going to get hot and move around and create the fumes. So what happens when you come back, it's kind of puffed out, and you take that vent off and it goes, psh. Yeah, that's what happens in the fuel tanks in our cars, folks. We just don't see it. So what there is on this is the evap system, evaporative emissions, that it's got a line that goes to the back, and it takes that pressure off the tank if it gets to be too much. So there's a valve on the engine that's turned on at certain times. When it sees too much pressure, it turns on and brings the pressure back down. So there's, 15, 20 codes for that system. So there's all kinds of stuff that it could be. It can't just be a gas cap. It could be maybe a rock flew up and hit the line underneath there and knocked the hose off, or put a hole in the evap line. It's going to set a large leak evaporative emissions code, which also the gas cap could, but the kid at the parts store is not going to know that. He's not going to put the specific tool on there to diagnose that correctly. And don't get me wrong, I'm not sitting here telling you that you need to take it to a shop when it's a check engine light, but things are so sophisticated now that why wouldn't you? Why would you want to waste time and waste money trying to do something that we're not really sure if it's going to fix it or not? So there's steps that we take and we get to the bottom of it, and then we're absolutely certain. Are there times where we get to the end of a flow chart and I still don't think that that's the right thing, so, and I was always skeptical of any kind of flow chart that I've ever flowed down and used. So it's difficult. It's not a simple process, folks. It's not just go to the parts store, get a code, get a part, fix it. I mean, if you go to the back of the car and you've got an evaporative emissions code and it's P0455 large leak, and you open the fuel door and the gas cap falls out onto the strap, okay, yeah, all right. The gas cap was off. That creates a large leak because the system closes and it can't see any pressure being generated in the system. So it says, hey, man, there's a large leak. And also, this system, it takes the fumes. The fumes are not good for the environment, for the ozone or the air quality in general. So the fumes are taken off the tank and put into the intake system while the vehicle's running and going down the road, and you don't even know it. You're saving the environment if you have your evaporative emission system working correctly. So it's not just nothing. And it's not just take it to the parts store and get a part. It's knowing what to do, knowing what the code is, knowing that there's more than one thing that it could be in a lot of instances. There's so many different codes and there's so many different things that it could be. It's hard to just say it's nothing. It's not nothing, people. Okay, so let's get back to what I was talking about earlier. And there's a couple of different things that happen when the light comes on. It does store a code for us. And it also takes a picture of the freeze frame data. And what that is the data that the engine computer sees at that second. It's a photograph. It goes, takes a picture of what's going on when that code sets. And if it's a type A code, which turns the light on, then it's going to turn the light on. If it's an issue where it's a potentially catalytic damaging code, so if it's a potentially damaging to your catalytic converter, the light will flash. This means a couple of different things. So it's flashing to, number one, get your attention, to say, hey, it's the kid that's waving both arms in the back of the class saying, hey, hello, there's a problem here. It's to get your attention. And it also means that the engine is not running on all cylinders. So if it's a 4-cylinder, it's missing on 1 or 2, potentially 3, or all of them. And if it's a V6, it's, again, it's missing on 1 or more cylinders. And it's a potentially catalytic damaging code, which means if it's left untreated or undone or undiagnosed, or if you let it go, you run the risk of damaging your catalytic converter or both of them. Okay, so if it's a V6 car, it's most likely got a catalytic converter for each cylinder bank. And what I mean by that, there's 3 cylinders on the left and there's 3 cylinders on the right. So it's wherever cylinder 1 is bank 1 and wherever cylinder number 2 is bank 2. Okay. And it varies between manufacturers, which bank is which. So that's why we have service information and off the top of our heads anymore, because most manufacturers have narrowed their V6s down to 1. And it's in all of their models. And the 4 cylinders, usually there's a few, but those are 1 bank only. So it's kind of simple. Anyway, so the check engine light's going to flash at you. It means it's not running on all cylinders. And you need to address it as soon as possible. Because you do run the risk of, and I priced out a catalytic converter replacement for a customer that had a Ford Explorer with a 3.5 Ford V6, and it was around $2,500 if I want to guess at it quickly. And that's kind of a lot, and we want to make sure that if we can prevent spending that money, we get the car evaluated really quickly. So, and this is another thing where we run into this trap to where we are like, okay, we're not so sure we want to pay a shop to evaluate it. And we know that a friend said, hey, they check it for free over at the parts store. Okay. So we go over there and it's a P0302. It's missing on cylinder number 2. And, again, we go in and it's a, there's a spark plug it could be, or it could be the ignition coil, or it could be a plug wire if it doesn't have ignition coils, or it could be the coil pack, which drives all 6 cylinders or all 4 cylinders. So there's a number of different things that it could be, but it also could be mechanical, like mechanically the valves in the piston isn't working correctly in such a fashion that it's causing this misfire too. Or we haven't paid attention to our oil service reminder in our corner of our windshield, the sticker, and we're overdue, or we're low on oil, or it could be a lot of different things. So here's where it gets kind of sticky, and this is where I'm trying to go with this and say it's just like, try not to spin your wheels or waste your time. But if you want to just find out what the code is and you're just really curious, yeah, by all means, go to that parts store and find out, yeah, it's missing on cylinder number 2. Okay, that's good information for us. And it's always a very good idea. And it always makes me thrilled when a customer will say, hey, I took it to AutoZone. They told me, or one of the parts stores, and they told me it was missing on cylinder number 2. The code was P0302. Okay, that's great information for my technician and for us. So it also lets us know that, you were interested in it enough to take it somewhere to try and see if it was earth shattering or not. And this is. So, we've scheduled you an appointment and we're going to evaluate it. So shit, I just lost my train of thought. Fuck. So telling us you did that and went to the parts store and found out what code it was actually will help us in sort of a way that, you know, you're not just trying to bring it in and see if we're going to tell you the same thing that the parts store is, and to try and check us for some reason on whether or not we're going to be telling you the same thing. So there's certain times and there's certain instances where that's happened with customers in the past. And I've been like, why wouldn't you have told us that to start with, to help us, navigate through our diagnosis? Like, we go out and it's documented on the repair order and we're like, okay, yeah, the customer told us that. Here's the report from that particular parts store. Some of them print you out a little sheet of paper, and then you can do with that what you want. And so we go through a long process of evaluating whether or not all of these things that have to be checked on a misfire. It's more than just one thing. So obviously, presenting us with that information is always helpful. And don't get me wrong. If you've had somebody trying to work on it as well, that's helpful too. Hey, I took it over here. They told me it was missing on cylinder number 2. They recommended these 2 parts. We put those 2 parts on, and it still doesn't run good. Can you guys figure it out? Most likely we can. And it's refreshing when the customer is upfront and honest with us as far as that's what they've done. So that makes our job maybe a little bit easier, but it also tells us that they're invested in getting their car fixed, and they're interested in helping us help them. So keep that in mind too. So again, the check engine light will flash when it's a potentially catalytic damaging code. And what that means is so what happens and what goes on when the cylinders misfire is this fuel is sprayed into that cylinder. If it doesn't explode and fire, the piston's just pushing it out the exhaust. And that raw gas goes right into that catalytic converter, which is in close proximity to the exit of the cylinder head and the manifold. A lot of the vehicles are made with exhaust manifolds that are integrated with the catalytic converter on them, and those are rather expensive. So you want to get this addressed as soon as you can so that you don't damage that catalytic converter and cause yourself a really expensive repair at that point. So this raw gas goes right into that catalytic converter, and what's inside these catalytic converters is precious metals called platinum, palladium, and rhodium. Okay? And these 3 precious metals are very expensive. Platinum in particular and rhodium also are very expensive. And what happens with that, it's like a honeycomb that's in there. And it's these particles of these precious metals are attached to that honeycomb. And what happens with the exhaust gases is it goes through there. It has a chemical reaction or a scientific reaction in there that creates oxygen out the other end. So the carbon monoxide and the carbon dioxides go through there, and these precious metals will grab on and hold on to the carbon and release the oxygen molecules out the exhaust. So if this catalytic converter isn't performing its job very well, it will store a code, and it will also turn the check engine light on. Okay? So what the raw gas does when it goes out of the cylinder because it's not firing into that catalytic converter, it gets everything really hot, and it also will wash away those precious metals. And you can't really see them come out the tailpipe or anything like that because there's so much between the front of the engine and the back of the car for the exhaust. All those particles get stuck usually in the muffler or somewhere else, but it's not big enough to create something that you're going to see. So when these precious metals get washed away, the catalyst in there isn't efficient enough to do its job, and then it sees that and it turns the check engine light on. So backing up, the check engine light flashes because it's a potentially catalytic damaging code, because the raw fuel is going right into that catalytic converter, which will either make it way too hot and melt that honeycomb. And a lot of times we see the catalytic converter will fail and melt itself together. So think about putting your hand over your mouth and your nose and trying to breathe. It's hard, right? You're, here I am doing it, and I caught you doing it. Put your hand over your mouth and try to breathe. That's exactly what your engine is facing when it's trying to expel the exhaust gases after the explosion inside the cylinder. So again, something that really just needs to be addressed, and addressed quickly, because that kind of repair to a catalytic converter, and especially if you got a V6 and it's missing on more than one cylinder, you have the potential of damaging both of those catalytic converters. So it's something that you want to address, and address quickly. All right, that's going to do it for another episode of the All Automotive Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Clausen. And if you're listening to us on iHeartRadio, click the little follow button. That lets us let you know when there's a new episode. We are also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Give us a like, give us a follow, leave us a review. It all helps. We really appreciate the support of all our loyal listeners to the All Automotive Podcast. Until next time, I'm Matt Clausen saying, keep the greasy side down.